Okay, it looks like we've got basically everybody from the waiting room in. So, hi everybody. Thank you for joining us today for the first in our webinar series all about charging. Today we're going to go over the basics of electric vehicle charging, and then we've got two upcoming webinars, one all about installing charging at home, and one all about finding charging on the go if you need to go on a road trip. But today we're just going to cover the basics. If you're not familiar with Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we are a nonprofit organization. We work all across Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and our mission is to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. What that means is we run a series of programs and services that help people access various clean energy technologies, whether we're talking about renewable energy, solar, heat pumps, energy efficiency, or electric cars. And we also do public policy advocacy work at the state level to make sure that we've got policies on the books and are executing them to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions in our two states. Caroline and I focus on transportation, so obviously you're here for an electric vehicle webinar, but we also have lots of fun in-person events now that it's nice weather again, where you can see electric vehicles in person and learn how to charge them and all that. My name is Anna. I'm our electric vehicle program director, and I'll let Caroline introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Caroline. I'm an electric vehicle program associate here on the Drive Green team. Look forward to later in the webinar.
So Caroline and I are going to trade off different sections of this webinar today, and we'll have plenty of time for questions. We're probably all very used to Zoom meetings at this point, but want to go over some basics. So you will be muted throughout the webinar, but we absolutely encourage your engagement. So please, if you go to your Zoom box, navigate to the questions and ask us questions. Send us any questions you have, and at the end of the webinar, we'll go through them. If you would like to use closed captions, you should also see a button that says CC on it at the bottom of your screen. If you click on that, what we say will be transcribed live on the screen, so you can follow along that way. And just a note that we will share both the slides and a recording after the webinar, so no worries about taking frantic notes. We'll share all the information. We wanted to note that we are living in interesting times, and we are seeing increasing misinformation and disinformation about clean energy, largely originating from and funded by the fossil fuel industry. And this narrative is really dangerous for our health and our climate. We know from lots of good data that clean energy makes society better. It lowers prices, it's healthy, there's good paying jobs and choices for consumers. And so we have a campaign really called Truth to Power, where we really want to go into the details of the data and the technologies to make sure that people have the information they need and are sort of prepared for the misinformation and disinformation. So this is one of the first webinars in that series. You can scan the QR code to learn more about the upcoming efforts. We'll also have a podcast about it, but just wanted to make you aware of this campaign that we're running this year. But today specifically, we're going to talk about five elements of charging. So we're going to start with just a basic explanation of how charging works and what some of the key terms are that you'll see. Then we'll talk about the different levels of charging, different plug types, best practices for charging an electric vehicle, and then we'll go over how to find your EV and how to see what capabilities different vehicles have when it comes to charging. And again, as I mentioned, in May, we have a webinar about charging at home, and in June, we have a webinar about charging on the go. So hopefully you can participate in all three webinars in this series. So I'll start us off with how charging works and go over some key terms before I turn it over to Caroline. So a lot of people find talking about electricity intimidating. Quite honestly, I do too. But we're going to go over some key terms so that we're all on the same page. And for this whole discussion, we're going to use the metaphor of a water pipe as an electric vehicle charger. So basically, What a charger does is it pulls electricity from the grid and deposits it safely in a vehicle's battery. And we can use as a metaphor a pipe or a faucet pulling water from a distribution system and filling a bathtub. So we're going to use that metaphor to hopefully understand some key terms. The first is voltage. So voltage is the equivalent of the pipe size. It's the potential energy, basically, and it's determined by the power source. So whatever you're plugging your vehicle into. And so you'll see when you're looking for EV charging stations to install, you'll see information about that. Current is the other piece of this, and that is the water speed if we're talking about our pipe metaphor. So the water speed and the size of the pipe together determine the flow. And current is what is drawn by the electrical device, and it's limited to a safe level by circuit breakers. And that's basically what an EV charging station is a device to safely pull the correct amount of current for that vehicle. Together, those two things determine power, and that is the amount of energy delivered in a given amount of time. And this is measured in kilowatts. And this is one of the key terms that we'll see the most. So again, if you take the water speed and the pipe size, you get the flow. If you take the current and the potential, you get the power. And we'll talk more about that in the coming slides. And then finally, what we're ultimately measuring here or care about here is energy, and that is the total available capacity to do work, and it's measured in kilowatt hours. So if we're going back to our metaphor, the bathtub, how many drops of water you can put in the bathtub, that's how much energy you're storing in the battery. So a lot of times when you're talking about EV charging, people get into voltage and amps and all that, but for our conversation today, we're really going to focus on power, which is how fast a car can charge. And so that's the equivalent of the flow of water in the pipe, and energy in kilowatt hours, how much energy a car's battery can hold. And that the parallel there is the size of the bathtub. So when you hear us talk about kilowatt hours, we're talking about energy stored in the battery. And when you hear us talking about kilowatts, we're talking about power, how quickly that battery can charge. Um, Moving on to some key terms. When we say charger, a lot of people envisage the thing that you plug your vehicle into, but there's actually an onboard charger, and this is just one point of clarification that we want to make before we dive into the rest of this presentation. So the charger is a device that's built into the vehicle. So when you plug your vehicle into a home outlet, you're receiving, or the vehicle is drawing electricity in AC, alternating current, but it needs to be converted basically into direct current to actually put into the battery, and that's what that onboard charger does. So it's not a device that you see, but it is in your vehicle doing that work. And the thing that you actually plug your vehicle into is technically called electric vehicle supply equipment, or EVSE. So that is equipment that is delivering electricity to the vehicle from an outside source. Most people refer to this as a charger, and we probably will by accident in this conversation because that's just how people actually talk about these things. But very technically speaking, the thing you plug your vehicle into is EVSE, and there's an onboard charger converting AC to DC to actually fill the battery. Moving on, we want to answer the sort of key question of how fast can you charge your electric vehicle, because that is sort of one of the first questions that people ask when we talk about electric cars. And there's a couple different factors that we'll go over in a couple slides. The first is that each EVSE has a maximum power that it can deliver. And so for this little example that we're going to have here, we've got an electric vehicle supply equipment, EVSE, that can deliver power at 6.6 kilowatts. Each vehicle has an onboard charger, and that onboard charger has a maximum power that it can accept. So in this example, we've got a 6.6 kilowatt charging unit plugging into a vehicle that can only accept 7.2 kilowatts. And so the power that you actually charge at is the lesser of those two maximums. So in this case, you've got a 6.6 kilowatt charger it can only deliver 6.6 kilowatts regardless of what the vehicle can accept. So in this case, we're going to be charging at 6.6 kilowatts. If, however, we are plugged into a higher level charging station that can deliver 10 kilowatts, we're going to charge at 7.2 because that's the maximum at which the vehicle can accept power. Um, this is important because we're now at a place where there's a pretty wide range in how quickly or what power at what power level electric vehicles can charge. And so you might see a vehicle that can charge at 350 kilowatts on DC fast charging, which we'll talk about later. And that's all well and good, but you also want to take a look at, okay, what's the power level of the charging stations in your area? Are there any that actually charge at 350 kilowatts? Because if they don't, you might be charging at 150 anyway. But long story short, a vehicle will charge at the lesser of the two power maximums of the EVSE and the onboard charger. The other thing that impacts how quickly you can charge is the weather. And we have a whole webinar all about winter driving where we talk about this in detail. But basically, when it's very cold, more of the incoming electricity goes to warming the battery because the battery wants to be at an optimal temperature for charging. So you may see slower charging speeds when it's very, very cold. And I'm talking like sub 20, sub 10 degrees Fahrenheit. However, more and more manufacturers are introducing a feature called battery conditioning, where basically you tell your vehicle before you charge, hey, I'm going to go charge, and it will warm itself up in advance of the charging session so that the charging session can go sort of at the maximum speed that that vehicle can support. So this is not something that you need to worry about if you're looking at an EV. Basically, you might notice this on the handful of days where it's very, very cold in the winter, but most of the time you shouldn't really notice slower charging speeds. So the sort of next question in this line of questions is, okay, if now I know how fast I can charge, how far can I go once I've charged up? And here you'll see when you look at electric vehicles that every vehicle comes with a range number, and that comes from tests that the Environmental Protection Agency does. And so you'll see, okay, vehicle A gets 258 miles per charge. That's a year-round estimate and an estimate based on assumptions of how much highway driving you're doing versus city driving. So for any given trip, your range will depend on a couple factors. First is obviously the size of the battery, how many kilowatt hours of electricity it stores, or if we're thinking back to our metaphor, like how big is that bathtub and how full is that bathtub? And a larger battery will store more energy and basically have a longer range than a smaller battery. But it also really matters what the efficiency of the vehicle is. Basically, how good is that vehicle at converting a kilowatt hour of electricity into movement? So larger and heavier vehicles are less efficient, and so they might have a bigger battery, but not have that much bigger of a range because they're less efficient. So those two factors together um, uh, influence each other when it comes to range. But then there's also type of driving. If you are doing a lot of highway driving, you're driving really fast, there's a lot of wind resistance, you'll see range decrease faster than it would if you are in stop and go traffic. There are features that help prolong your range that you can turn on. One's called regenerative braking, and basically it means you're using electricity more efficiently when you're driving. And then there's also basic things of like how aggressively do you drive? Are you a person who slams on the accelerator and then slams on the brakes and wastes a lot of energy that way? That can influence how much range you get once you're charged up. And then finally, weather. If it's very, very cold or very hot, you'll see your battery's reserves deplete faster. So all of these factors together influence how far you can go. If you want to learn more about this, we've got an Electric Vehicle 101 webinar where we talk about that and a winter driving webinar when we talk about that. But today we're focused on charging. So far we've learned EVSE is the thing you plug your car into. There's an onboard charger, and the power level of the charger and the car determine how quickly the vehicle can charge. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Caroline to talk about the different levels of charging.
Yeah, so in the next couple of slides, we'll look at level 1, level 2, and level 3 for DC fast charging. Mm. Okay, so there are three basic levels. Level 1 is also known as trickle charging. It's the slowest type of charging, and we'll get a little bit more into it on the next slide. And then secondly and thirdly, there's level 2 charging. Level 2 is faster than level 1. It is most often done at home if you install the right outlet. But you'll also see level 2 charging stations at public charging stations. And then there's DC fast charging called level 3, which utilizes a lot of power and is, because of that, is generally only at public charging stations. But if you're in a rush, DC fast charging might be a good option, and there's generally some charging around you. And then we'll get a little bit more deeper into the three basic levels in the next few slides. So for level 1, you will need a charging cord, and often this might come with your EV if you purchase or lease, but you may have to purchase the cord separately. This type of charging will utilize a standard 120 volt household outlet, the majority of which you will see in your home. And it will generally add around 4 miles of charge per hour spent plugged in to that 120 volt household outlet. And if you charge overnight, this can add up to 40 or so miles. So this is a type of charging that can be suitable for general commutes of like 40 miles or less, or depending on your lifestyle. It is a very good, consistent, and reliable way to charge if you have a good chunk of time to plug your vehicle in at home. Then we'll move on to level 2, I believe. So level 2 charging will also utilize a charging cord that often will come with your vehicle, but depending on the manufacturing and depending on the model, you might have to purchase a level 2 charging cord separately. This will utilize a higher 240 volt outlet. These are also pretty standard, but tend to power heavier duty appliances like your washing machine or your washer or dryer. So generally will require an electrician to come into your home and install this outlet. This is faster than level 1, so even more suitable for some folks. And this will add anywhere from 20 to 50 miles per hour, depending on the type of EV that you drive. And again, you can install these at home, or you might find these at public charging stations. Often, we'll see folks will install a level 2 charger at home and get that outlet. There are also portable options. You might have a portable level 2 charging cord, or you can have a stationary charging station at home with that outlet. These are very suitable towards most drivers and can easily charge if you work from home, or if your workplace has a charging station near you. You might charge during the workday or at night. And yeah, it's very suitable for most driving habits. And so we'll get into different charging speeds with level 2 because that really depends on the vehicle and the vehicle's onboard charger capacity and the charger's maximum charging speed. So if we look at an onboard charge capacity of greater than 10 kilowatts, some of these popular models might include the Blazer, the Ford Mach-E, or the Hyundai Ioniq. So per hour of charge when hooked up to a level 2, these vehicles will reach anywhere from 30 or more miles per hour. And then some Tesla models might have a lower charging capacity below 10 kilowatts, and that charging speed will range from 25 to 30. You can see that on the right, on the last two rows, most of those vehicles with a lower onboard charging capacity are plug-in hybrids. So it is good to know that plug-in hybrids can be plugged into level 1 or level 2 charging. And these vehicles have a small battery that has in effect, a lower onboard charging capacity than, say, a pure battery EV. And with most, you can still reach anywhere from 11 to 22 or 24 miles. And again, this graph is just a reference as well. Then here we'll look at DC fast charging, but we'll compare DC or direct current fast charging with lower level types of charging. So lower level, any non-DC fast charging is called AC charging if we want to get technical, and that really just refers to alternating current. That's what that AC stands for. And so level 1 or level 2, this will be slower, will utilize as chargers the car's onboard converter. Whereas DC fast charging will plug into an external source and uses an external converter. It's part of the reason why DC requires a lot more power. So if we look at the left of this image, we will see a power source that is the wall outlet or the level 2 charger. We will see if you look at the arrows, you can see the AC power, the alternating current power, will enter the car and then be converted to DC by the vehicle's onboard charger before it reaches the battery. So this is a slower charging because this conversion of power will happen inside the car, and this type of car has a lower power capacity than that of the wall outlet. But then we'll look at the right, and we can see that in this image, to compare the two, the vehicle is plugged into two power types. But we can see that power capacity for DC of the charger is 50 kilowatts. That is the overall capacity of that charger to provide charging and mileage. And then within DC fast charging, the direct current power is sent right to the battery, and this bypasses the onboard charger. So this conversion of AC or alternating current to direct current power essentially happens outside of the vehicle at a higher power level. As you can see at that fastened charging station. So this charging is significantly quicker and generally achieves a much higher mileage range per hour or per 30 minutes intervals than that of level 2. And then one other quick note, both slower and DC, so slower meaning level 1 or level 2, and DC fast charging will deliver power to the battery, which is lithium ion. And then this is managed by the battery's management system. So when you see BMS on top of the battery, that's what that refers to. Yeah. And we can move on to the next slide. And we'll get into this later in the presentation when we talk about best practices. But if you are hooked up to a charger, it is generally a good thing to go by to reach a maximum of 80% of battery. If you're hooked up to a DC fast charger, generally, and in most cases, your vehicle will reach 80% of the full charge in as little as half an hour. That's pretty great. And we'll get into best practices later. I'll turn the mic back to Anna.
Thank you. So for some reason I see a big box right now. Caroline, let me know if there's a weird zoom in happening here.
There is a little bit of a weird zoom.
That has never happened to me before. Let me figure that out. Well, that's fun. Thanks all everyone for bearing with me on that. So we just learned about level 1, level 2, and DC fast charging. Those are the three main levels of EV charging. And now we're going to talk about plug types because that is unfortunately a confusing but getting better space. So historically, there have been several different plug types for different vehicles and different levels of charging. But we're in a weird transition mode in the industry right now where we're standardizing on the North American Charging Standard, which is known as NACS. And that's what Tesla has used historically. And now all non-Tesla manufacturers are shifting to that standard. But in the meantime, we still have all these old vehicles with the old plugs and charging stations with the old plugs. So we're going to just go through it one by one and talk about each separate plug and what it's used for and where this is all headed. So I'll start with NACS. That's the North American Charging Standard. The picture on the bottom is what that plug looks like. And this is the plug that was developed by Tesla and used to be proprietary. And it is the same port for that vehicle. The same port is used for level 1, level 2, and DC fast charging. As I mentioned, it used to be proprietary for Tesla, so all the supercharging stations, that's their brand for DC fast chargers, they all use this port. In 2023, they opened up that standard to other automakers. So basically, it's no longer proprietary. They made all that information public. And now many automakers have adapters available. So if you have a vehicle with a different plug, you can get an adapter to use a NACS charging station. And they're also all planning on building in the NACS port to future models. So a couple years from now, all new models will just have this one plug type, and it will be the same across manufacturers, and it'll be the same for level 1, level 2, and DC fast charging. So NACS was step 1. Right now, all non-Tesla vehicles have a different port called the J1772, and that's shown at the bottom of the screen here. All other vehicles have this one port for level 1 and level 2 charging. There are adapters available for Tesla drivers who want to use J1772 ports. But up until this point, basically, Tesla has built the NACS ports into their vehicles, and everybody else has built in these J1772 ports into their vehicles. For DC fast charging, the industry is split even a little more. So CCS is also known as the SAE standard. This is a plug type that is only used for DC fast charging. It's also known as the J1772 combo because it's basically just the addition of two prongs underneath the J1772 port. So if you look at the picture on the bottom, you've got that circle, that's basically the J1772, and then there's these two prongs underneath, and that turns that into a combo or a CCS DC fast charger. And historically, this was used by American and European manufacturers. So the Chevy Bolts, the BMWs, they all have this CCS standard for DC fast charging. Asian manufacturers used a different standard historically called CHAdeMO. I don't remember what CHAdeMO stands for or why it's spelled like that, but that's CHAdeMO, and the picture on the bottom shows you what that port looks like. This again is only used for DC fast charging, and it's historically used by Asian manufacturers. Nissan was already transitioning to CCS for the American market, but everybody's transitioning to NACS. But we do have a situation right now where we have EVs on the road that may have any of these three standards for DC fast charging, or either the Tesla or the J1772 standard for level 2 charging, which is confusing when you're explaining it all. Once you have an EV and you just know which ports your vehicle has, it's a little bit easier to navigate. But this is part of the reason why the NACS development is very exciting, because it'll make explaining all of this a lot simpler. Oh yes, sorry, this was already being phased out, but now NACS seems to be the way the market is going. One cool thing about CHAdeMO that I will note is that it's capable of bidirectional charging. So if you've heard of vehicle to building or vehicle to load or vehicle to grid technology, basically all of these are cases where we treat electric vehicles not just as consumers of electricity, but also sources of electricity. So there's a lot of work being done to basically turn electric vehicles into little disaggregated power plants. So we could see a future world where an electric vehicle might charge up overnight, If we've got a lot of offshore wind blowing and there's a lot of excess capacity, electric vehicles can soak that up, and then they could discharge it back onto the grid when it's 90 degrees and it's 5 p.m. and everybody's got all their air conditioners on. They can help smooth out supply and demand on the grid. And that's a really exciting space. But right now, it's only vehicles that have the or historically, it was only vehicles that had this CHAdeMO port plugged in that were capable of that. So a lot of the early pilots are basically the Nissan Leaf. But now there's some other vehicles that are capable of this too. But this is just one plus of the CHAdeMO port compared to some of the others. What does this all look like? We've got 3 example vehicles here to sort of show the current variety of options. So on the left, we've got a picture of the charging port of a Nissan Leaf. So you'll see that there's basically 2 plugs right next to each other. On the left, you've got the CHAdeMO plug. That's the like super circular one, and that's what you would use for DC fast charging. And then on the right in that same picture on left, you've got the J1772, which you would use for level 1 or level 2. So Nissan vehicles, for example, they have these 2 ports right next to each other. In the middle picture, we've got the charging port of a Chevy Bolt, which shows you the CCS or the J1772 combo. So at the top, you've got that same J1772 plug circle. And then underneath it, you've got those 2 prongs, which are covered up by that orange flap when you're not doing DC fast charging, but you can uncover when you do want to do DC fast charging and need those 2 prongs. And then on the right, you can see a NACS charging port in a Tesla Model 3. And you can see, aside from Tesla and the proprietary history and all of that, it's just a simpler port. It's much smaller, it's easier to maneuver, and it's just one port for all 3 charging types. Instead of having to deal with 2 ports next to each other or a port with a little flap, it's just one option. So increasingly, we'll see manufacturers building EVs with just that NACS port natively built in. We are, of course, in this stage, though, where there's lots of vehicles that don't have that NACS port natively built in, which is why there are adapters that are available. So every major auto manufacturer has made an agreement with Tesla to basically start using this NACS charging port and to build adapters so that non-Tesla vehicles can use Tesla charging stations, or non-NACS vehicles can use NACS charging stations. And each of the manufacturers is sort of in a different stage of fulfilling those agreements. But for Cadillac, Chevy, Ford, GMC, Hyundai, Mercedes-Benz, Kia, Polestar, Rivian, and Volvo, you can get an adapter from the manufacturer so that you can basically plug that into the end of the charging cord so that you can plug a charging cord into your vehicle. For other manufacturers, the rollout is still to come. Quite honestly, all the tariffs and the economic confusion that we're living through is making it a little nebulous when those manufacturers are actually going to make those available. But one thing we do really want to stress is that if you would like one of these chargers, you should absolutely go through the manufacturer of your vehicle to procure it. There are lots of third-party adapters available that you can find on Amazon or other places like that, but most of the manufacturers will void the warranty if you use a charger other than the one that they're supplying you. If you get one of these things, you'll notice like it's heavy. There's a lot of technology in there doing a lot of work to safely take this high-powered electricity and transfer it from the charging cord through the adapter into the vehicle. So you really want to go with one that has been approved by the manufacturer to make sure, A, that it all works safely, and then B, that you don't void your warranty. Some of the manufacturers have made these available for free, others are selling them. Each is kind of taking their own approach, but it's definitely worth looking into this if you want to take a lot of long road trips and want to make sure that you have access to all of the available charging in public, to take a look into this. And with that, I will hand it back over to Caroline for charging best practices.
Yeah, so we can get started. We can move to the next slide, and we'll talk about the 80-20 rule first, I believe. So, opportunity charging can be your friend. If we compare charging an EV versus refueling a traditional gas vehicle, we can see that charging at home is, or work, or on the go is very flexible, and there are chargers around us. We'll go into locating nearby charging near you in a few slides. But if you compare that to refueling at a gas station, sometimes you might find, if you've ever driven a gas car, that it can be a little bit inconvenient sometimes to locate a gas station, especially if you're on the highway or if you're on a long trip that may or may not be on your route. So we want to stress that charging is incredibly flexible and there's a lot of charging near you. We'll get into that in a slide or two. We really recommend an 80-20% rule. So what that really means is we encourage you to keep your vehicle charged between 50 to 80% most of the time. Um, Essentially, keeping your vehicle charged to 80% helps to enhance battery health and lifespan. Um, your vehicle will likely be able to uh, be paired and connect with the vehicle's manufacturing smart charging app. Many models have this, and this essentially can track your charging. If you're charging at home or charging at a charging station, and you can set it up so that you smart charge and your vehicle will stop charging after 80%. Since EVs have a lithium-ion battery, as do many of our smart devices, it's also another good reason is that the idea of unplugging your device once you reach a full charge transcends that of battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, but to our phones and our computers as well. So that same idea applies to EVs. So we recommend unplugging once you've reached 80%. But if you charge up to 100%, it's not a big deal at all. There is a buffer built in by the battery management system that works to enhance and protect your battery's health and lifespan. Yeah. So you can charge at home and at public charging stations. We've created a couple of charging guides that go over the charging installation process for single family and multifamily unit homes. When we send out these webinar slides and the recording, make sure to link both of those installation guides with our follow-up email. It's much easier to charge at home if you can. And even the utilities offer incentives to help install charging. In a future webinar, I believe at our next webinar later this month, next month, I believe actually, when we talk about charging at home, we'll get into more about these guides and what the different incentives look like from the utilities. Another best practice tip is planning ahead. So we talked about charging at a public charging station, but locating those chargers is incredibly important. And there are some really good tools that we recommend. Two of them are called PlugShare and a Better Route Planner. We have a webinar coming up on charging on the go on June 11th. So we'll talk more about this topic, but there are a few different apps, and we just want to showcase that public charging is much more available than most people think at a first glance. So if we can go back one slide, PlugShare, one of the tools that I mentioned, this is an open source mapping tool that will locate charging near you. And when I say open source, that means that, say, if you're locating chargers near you, if a charger is down or is currently busy, then users can go into the app and can update that in real time. So you'll see that some of these chargers are color coded. This contrasts between level 2 and DC fast charging. Some chargers or charging stations are in construction, but these are two screenshots from charging in Providence and then charging in Boston, just to showcase two snippets on a map that there is charging near you, and happy to send out some links to these resources. One other resource is a Better Route Planner, and that is another mapping tool, but is essentially recommended as well for longer trip planning. So PlugShare is totally useful, But if you have a long trip coming up and you're looking to map out your route, we recommend using a better route planner to help identify some of those charging stations near you if you need to plug in on that road trip. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, I believe we might have missed one tip. Yeah, and that is preconditioning your battery. We recommend preconditioning your battery. Each vehicle, each EV, and even traditional gas vehicles all have an optimal temperature. So sometimes your vehicle will have this setting in many cases. So there's an option to just precondition the vehicle. That may involve heating the battery, or if you're in the winter. And we did mention that we have a winter driving webinar series or just webinar recording, and you can send that out if anyone would like that link. But if you're driving in the winter and live in New England, one way to precondition your battery and precondition your vehicle to plug in might involve putting on your seat warmers. You might warm your steering wheel. Some cars have that feature. This is just to help get the battery to an optimal temperature to save power when you plug in. And um, that automatic feature will automatically bring your battery to the optimal temperature for charging. Even in the summer, a battery's optimal temperature is generally around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So there is some preconditioning involved, and that is recommended, even in warmer temperatures as well. Think I'll pass it on to Anna for the next part.
Thank you. We'll see if we can do this without awkwardly zooming in on the slides. So last section here is we want to talk about how, if you are in the market for an EV, how do you navigate all these different charging options and figure out which vehicle would be best for you. So luckily enough, we have an EV finder on our website that shows the basic information for every electric vehicle that we're aware of being sold in New England. We have lots of information about incentives and costs and what's all-wheel drive and what's the towing capacity and all of that. But what I want to highlight today is some of the features that we've talked about in this webinar. So first, if you go to this EV Finder, you can see how fast different models charge on level 2 charging. So for this Equinox, we've got the information as 34 miles per hour spent charging, and the level 2 charging rate is 11.5 kilowatts. We've also got information about the DC fast charging power level. So this Kia EV6 charges at 200 kilowatts, but if we go back, this Equinox, the max is 150. So you can compare and contrast the vehicles like that. We've also got information about the DC fast charging port that is built in. So for this Hyundai Kona, you can see that they're built in with the CCS port, which is the most common non-Tesla charger. And you can also see what the status is on the transition to NACS. So the Nissan Leaf does not yet have an adapter available, but for the Hyundai Kona Electric, there is an adapter available. So you can use the tool to filter out or filter exactly what you're looking for. So if you want an electric vehicle that has that NACS adapter, you can filter by that. You can also filter by price or range or all-wheel drive or lots of other features, because at this point there are so many more electric vehicle options than there used to be. You can actually get picky and look for one that meets all your needs. So if you go to greenenergyconsumers.org/drivegreen, you can find our EV Finder, and you can narrow down the list. You can even check off which trims you're most interested in. And then if you finish the sign up form, we'll send you an email when we learn anything new about that vehicle model. So definitely recommend checking that out. We are already at the end of this webinar, but we've got lots of webinars coming up on electric vehicles and on other topics. So the most immediate next ones are about transitioning from heating oil to heat pumps, because the fuel that you are transitioning from really matters when you're thinking about electric air source heat pumps. We've got our Truth to Power series, starting with just general debunking of energy disinformation. We've got, as we mentioned, our electric vehicle charging at home webinar on May 6th, and then electric vehicle charging on the go on June 11th. And then we've got a bunch of in-person events, all of which happen to be in Providence. So we've got a solar tour, a wind turbine tour, and our annual spring meeting, which is at the Roger Williams Botanical Gardens, where we just talk about all the work that we've done in the last year and what we're looking forward to doing in the next year. So we hope that you can join us for any or all of those. And then finally, we are a nonprofit organization and we try and make as much information available as we can for free. If you are willing and able, we would of course appreciate any and all donations. You can go to greenenergyconsumers.org/donate so that we can keep making more webinars like this available to more people. And then finally, just wanted to say thank you before we head to our Q&A. There's lots of ways to engage with us if you'd like, particularly on the topic of electric vehicles. So as I mentioned, you can use our EV Finder to find which vehicles would be the best for you. We also have a community Facebook group where you can interact with current EV drivers and ask them questions about their experience. We are on all the socials, Instagram, but also Facebook, less and less Twitter, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. We've got a quarterly newsletter where we send out all the latest information on the EV market that we think is useful for folks in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. We've also got a pledge that you can sign that your next car will be electric because we recognize not everybody's always in the market for a vehicle. So with that, I think we can go to Q&A, and I definitely see that there have been a bunch of bloops. Let's see. Caroline, if you see Q&A and want to start,
Yeah. Um, we have one question. How are electric vehicle supply installations impacted by the current administration's freeze of NEVI and IRA funds?
An excellent question. So for those who aren't familiar with those two acronyms, NEVI is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program that was funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Every state in the country got a certain amount of funding based on a formula that was supposed to be used to build out DC fast charging hubs so that we've got them every 50 miles on key highways. The current administration has made it very clear that they want to completely do away with that program, but uh, they can only currently prevent future funds from funds that have not always already been sent to the states. They are holding, but funds that have been delivered to the states can use. And it will be a legal battle because technically Congress has allocated those funds to states, so they should not legally be able to hold them back. What we've heard is Rhode Island has already completed its phase one, so those 50-mile gaps are filled in Rhode Island. And in Massachusetts, the state was awarded $63.5 million. They have $50 million, so they're working with what they have, and projects are ongoing. I think future funding is a big question mark. And there was also a competitive grant program funded by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law called the Community Fueling Infrastructure, CFI grant. And that the money has not moved. So I know that in Rhode Island, for example, the Office of Energy Resources won an award that they were going to build charging stations in disadvantaged communities across the state, and they have not received that funding, and that is just on hold. So definitely all of that is going to have an impact. What I do want to highlight is that NEVI is not the be all and end all of building out EV charging stations. So our utilities are putting money into building out charging stations. State government is putting money into building out charging stations, and then the private sector is putting money into building out charging stations. So there, I would point to a project called Iona or Iona, IONNA. This is a project of several manufacturers working together to build out what they're calling rechargeries, which I think is an interesting marketing choice. But they are building out charging stations that look different from any kind of charging station we've seen so far, in that they have a nice canopy. They have a space where you can go use the bathroom, get a cup of coffee. And they're really trying to innovate in that space. So that gives me some hope that this market will keep going. But there's no sugarcoating that the developments at the federal level are definitely going to slow this all down.
We have another couple of questions.
Mhm.
Someone is asking if we can explain why the 80% rule and recommendation is recommending and what happens after the battery, after someone charges to 80%.
So a lot of the battery management software that Caroline mentioned, the BMS, is about protecting the battery from excessive heat, because heat is what degrades a battery over time. And when you reach 80% full, the vehicle and the charging station are communicating with each other. And at that point, the battery management system says, slow down. Like we need to slow down charging so that we don't overheat. And so this is most noticeable if you're DC fast charging. That if you and we'll go over this in our Charging on the Go webinar, that you might get 100 miles. I'm making up numbers a little bit, but essentially you could get 100 miles in the first half hour, and then in the second half hour only get 50 miles because of that slowing down. And that's why our EV ambassadors, folks that we know who drive electric vehicles, that's why they recommend a better route planner as much as they do, because it will take that into account. So if you say, I'm starting here and I'm starting there, and I want to spend the least amount of time charging as possible, it might say, okay, charge from 50 to 80% here, and then from 60 to 70% there, and map that out for you so that you're not sitting there waiting for that 80 to 100% to happen. It's a little less noticeable with level two charging because level two charging isn't as high powered, so that concern about the heat isn't quite as severe as with DC fast charging.
Great. We have another question, I believe time allows. Do the adapters that are available to use NACS or that are able to be used by a fast charger, do they cut down on the amount of kilowatts per hour that a car can charge?
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer, but we will find out and let you know. I believe they would default to the onboard charger in the vehicle and let that determine, but that is a great question that I have not been asked before. Thank you. We will find out.
Another question we have is what type of AC to DC converter would be required to do fast charging at home?
Um, My understanding is that DC fast charging, you're just not going to be able to do at home. In the Charging at Home webinar, we'll talk about the costs of installing charging. A level two charger installation can cost anywhere from a couple hundred to a couple $1,000, depending on the home. DC fast charging stations, when they're going into commercial areas, are hundreds of thousands of dollars because that's a lot of power to supply. The only times where you might see a DC fast charger in a residential setting is if it's a big multi-unit dwelling, like a big apartment block or something like that. There might be cases where those folks are installing a DC fast charger. But if you can charge at home, level two is great. It will basically replenish your battery overnight unless you drive like 300 miles every day, in which case you might need a little bit more time. But that level two charger is more than enough for most people charging at home. And there you don't need to worry about any of that. You basically just buy a unit and have it installed by an electrician or buy a portable unit which you just plug into a 240 volt outlet, and then you're done. And we'll go over all of that in more detail in the May webinar.
We have a note from one of our listeners. So someone wanted to just plug three free nationwide events to help plan local events, but mainly National Drive Electric Month in September and October. I know we will likely have an event during National Drive Electric Month or a few, so stay tuned for that. The entire month of April is National Drive Electric Earth Day. So we will actually be at a couple of Earth Day events and have a few EVs there. So if you live in the Massachusetts area, we're happy to send out some of that information, or we can even turn back to our events slide for upcoming events that are that are in Earth Month. Thank you. Do we have time for one or two more questions?
Yeah.
Awesome. Someone asked if the DC fast charger, particularly the Tesla supercharging stations, if they are all owned by Tesla.
So, this is a timely question. So Tesla, as part of their business strategy, going back to their earliest EVs, they invested in building out this DC fast charging network all across the country. And my understanding is that it's sort of a mix of business models. So in some cases, you might have a mall or some sort of parking lot that's leasing space to Tesla. So Tesla pays some sort of monthly or quarterly or annual lease to whoever actually owns that land, and they operate and manage the charging stations. And in other cases, they might buy the land themselves and own and operate them. There's no question about like, are those Tesla charging stations part of Tesla? Yes, they are. Um, I know that there's a lot of political stuff going around Tesla, which we can't comment on because we're a 501(c)(3) nonprofit. We can talk about policies, but not candidates. But there are lots of non-Tesla charging stations as well. And in the resource that Caroline mentioned, PlugShare, you can filter by charging network operator. So if you want to see just the ChargePoint and EVgo and Electrify America charging stations, those are all companies that are building out a network of EV charging stations. You can filter and say, just show me those. So there are a lot more options than people think. Um, and I would definitely encourage you go check out those mapping tools. And this Iona project I think is really exciting and interesting. They're going to put a ton of money into this. I really hope that it survives the current economic turmoil that we're seeing. But definitely use that PlugShare tool as a starting point to see what's available near you.
Yeah. And then we have a question, really just asking if there's any data on battery longevity. And I know that's something we recently read about, and something we've seen recently, that a lot of the earliest EVs that are still on the road from the early 2010s, of those that are still on the road, the majority of them, their batteries has not been replaced yet. But I know, Anna, maybe this is something we can send out, some resources when we send out the slides. What do you think?
Yeah, I will say really quickly that batteries do degrade over time. We've all seen that with cell phones or anything else that runs on a rechargeable battery. The rate of decline is decreasing as battery management software gets better and better and better. So there's a company called Geotab that shares data every now and then on the real life battery degradation of vehicles that are on the road, and you can see that it's getting better and better over time in newer models. There's also some really promising data showing that DC fast charging is not as detrimental to the batteries as it once was. It used to be that we would be like really only DC fast charge when you need to protect your battery. But now it seems like it's not as big of an issue as it used to be. And that's largely because the manufacturers have gotten much better in their battery cooling systems and their battery management software. So we can dig up some resources on that. But basically, EV batteries will decline 1 or 2% per year over the life of the vehicle. But if you're starting with a vehicle that has 300 miles per charge, you barely notice that with just the seasonal variation of range is a little more in the summer because it's nice. It's a little less in the winter because it's cold. So we can dig out that data for you.
Great. We have one more question, but I do know that we're running low on time. Um, One person is just asking about the general public charging infrastructure and what we think about whether that is enough to satisfy demand.
This is a great question and a famous chicken and egg question. Demand is growing. So it is challenging to say that the current public charging infrastructure is robust enough. I think we definitely need more charging. That's really clear. I see the second question is like, are there usually waits? I would say it depends a lot on the station. And one thing you can do is go to PlugShare and see what people have left in terms of comments. I think the times that there are the most waits are big travel days. So like the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, you might run into some wait times, but it does seem to really depend on which station you're talking about. Some are just more congested than others. But again, I would say check out PlugShare to see the comments, check out a better route planner to see, okay, if you're relying on public charging to make a trip, is it just that one station that you have, or are there options for you in case that one station is busy? And then lastly, I would just have this as a final plug to join our Drive Green community Facebook group and talk to other drivers and ask them what their experience has been because our EV ambassadors are super generous in sharing what their life has been like. Many of them have had a couple of EVs and gone on road trips all the way to Arizona and the Adirondacks and Montreal in the winter and are happy to tell you about their experience doing all that. So, with that, I see that we're at 1. So, I want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. As I said, we'll send out slides and a webinar recording and a bunch of links, and we hope to see you at the next webinars in our series.